Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he was president, had fireside chats. I think I'm going to start up Denise Knows Bathtub Chats. Yes, I'm going to talk with you while taking a bath. Yep, taking a bath. Okay. All right. One thing I was thinking about the other day, well, thoughts tend to come into my schizotypal disordered mind all the time. They come into everybody's mind, but weird thoughts come into mine, or interesting thoughts. And anyway, I was thinking about the blonde bombshells of the 1950s. I'm kind of a fan of that, not so much that period, but of specifically the blonde bombshells. For example, there were the 3 M's. Marilyn Monroe, who was basically the root of the whole thing, the source of the blonde bombshell ideal. And then she was part of the 3 M's, with the other 3 M's, the other 2 M's being Jayne Mansfield and Mamie Van Doren. Okay. Jayne Mansfield was often called the poor man's Marilyn. And the reason she was called this was that she was just as sexy as Marilyn. You know, she had an hourglass figure, wonderfully big breasts, and a narrow waist. Until she got, toward the end of her life, in her late 30s, she did start to get a little pudgy. But she had a narrow waist during a lot of her time period. And she was just as sexy as Marilyn Monroe. Kind of a cartoon figure, even more so than Marilyn Monroe. And then there was, but she was the poor man's Marilyn because her Marilyn Monroe imitations weren't quite right. You know, there was no substitute for the original. And she was able to convey the sexiness of Marilyn Monroe, but she couldn't convey the childlike vulnerability or the innocence of Marilyn Monroe. And some people have said that one of her better performances was in The Sheriff of Fractured Jaw, where Jayne Mansfield is less of a Marilyn Monroe imitator and plays a more savvy, knowledgeable, world-wise Jane Russell Mae West type figure. Okay. Mamie Van Doren was also called the poor man's Jayne Mansfield. I actually don't really see her that way. I think she was just her own figure. And as with Jayne Mansfield, she didn't quite, she didn't get across the vulnerability of Marilyn Monroe, although she was certainly just as sexy as Marilyn Monroe, and just as much of a performer as Jayne Mansfield. I actually think there was a 4th M. I'd like to get a 4th M in there, and that was Mary Blanchard. I think Mary Blanchard, who was the star of She-Devil, and the model for Al Cap's figure, Stupefying Jones, should kind of be considered the 4th M. But there were a lot of blondes, often bottle blondes in those days, who, you know, tried to imitate Marilyn Monroe. I mean, there's still people trying to imitate Marilyn Monroe. There's an endless number of figures who are Marilyn Monroe imitators. But there was no substitute for the original. Marilyn Monroe herself said that sometimes when she was recognized, she would play with the fans and say, no, I'm not Marilyn Monroe, I'm Sherry North. That was another Monroe imitator. Or I'm Mamie Van Doren. And that kind of underlines the fact that nobody could do Marilyn Monroe like Marilyn Monroe. Now, another thing about these blonde bombshells is that they kind of owed their popularity to a emphasis on old-fashioned femininity that tended to occur after World War II, when Rosie the Riveter went home to become Susie Homemaker. And Marilyn Monroe once made the statement, Women who seek to be equal to men lack ambition. There's a certain amount of truth in that statement, because the rules of courtesy do to some degree put women over men, above men, kind of privilege women. So some people could see the equality as a step down, or at least not a step up. But anyway, that's Denise Knows Bathtub Chat on the 1950s bombshells. Hope you liked hearing it, and will subscribe to my channel. And I'd also hope that you tell other people about me. I'm trying to grow my social media presence.